The following program is classified PG. It is not suitable for viewing by persons under 15 years of age without guidance from a parent or guardian.
Good afternoon, David John Hector. Born September 1939. 38. So it makes you 80 this year.
True.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Born in Eastbourne?
Wellington.
Wellington Hospital, yes. But here in Wellington.
Yep.
Yep. You went to, which school was it you were saying, Mahi?
Oh, primary school, Muratai.
Muratai, yep.
Which is still there and still a full primary.
Right, yep. And then you had a stint at a boarding school in New Plymouth.
Yes.
Which you had the displeasure of catching tuberculosis.
Yes.
Where did you go from there?
Well, after hospital, spent the rest of that school year at home recovering, which gets us up to 1950, end of 54.
Yeah. Came back to Hutt High School?
Then was enrolled at Hutt High, 2 years, sixth form there. Somewhat unclear what I wanted to do. Went and saw the careers advisory type at school, and he seemed to think broadcasting might be a useful fit, and gave me an intro to the supervising technicians at 2YA.
Okay, yeah.
So I toddled in there after school on the unit, in my uniform, and they seemed quite pleased to see me and sent me off to see the regional engineer, and he seemed quite pleased to see me. So they sent me a letter and said, start on Monday the 22nd of January.
Yep.
Then they had to send me another letter, start on Tuesday.
Okay.
The 22nd of January's anniversary day. Boo-boo. So, duly started as a technical trainee, 2IA, 38th Terrace. Building now demolished as an earthquake risk.
Yeah.
Premises that broadcasting had moved into as a temporary measure immediately before the war. Converted dance hall, a less suitable building for broadcasting, be hard to imagine. There we were running three radio stations directly, 2IA, 2IC, shortwave service.
Okay, yeah.
And the program department was providing all the material for 2ID, which is now 2ZM.
Okay, yeah.
And only ran in the evenings,
right.
3 hours an evening.
Yeah.
And a courier would come every morning and collect the program material and logs and take it down to Waring Taylor Street. And they'd do their thing.
Mm.
Been there about a week when apparently before normal hours all the lights went out. So the technician on duty started the emergency generator, which at least let him see what he was doing.
Helpful.
And when everybody arrived, supervising technician went down to have a look at this diesel in the basement to make sure all was well. Found it getting very hot and bothered because all the doors were shut. And as well as that, he found the fuel gauge reading empty.
Oh.
So he had a minor panic attack and got a relay onto pumping fuel out of a 44 that stood on the floor up into the gravity tank that fed the engine. Hadn't been pumping very long at all when fuel started going everywhere. The gauge was one of the kind that goes right round past full to empty. So it was pouring out the overflow.
Oh dear.
So after that, a relay of us junior trainees took turns to keep an eye on the machinery and make sure nothing got out of hand, while they went off upstairs to see if they could fix the reason for the lights.
Yeah.
Turned out one of the contactors on the switchboard, the coil had failed. A man of quick decisions and not always thinking it through, decided if I push the contactor in with a coat hanger, the interlocks will mean that the other contactor will drop out and we'll have light and back on mains. No sooner attempted than there was the ferocious bang, flames and smoke,
Yes.
all sorts of trouble, and matters were now worse than they were before. And to make matters worse still, the diesel started making an ominous knocking sound. They didn't know why. And that was when they got a professional electrician in to try and resolve our issues. He was also broadcasting staff, but worked up at the engineering section, Marchbank Street. So he came down, and now I'm losing track. Oh, they also transferred the program
Right.
to Waring Taylor Street, so that they could shut the place down and let this electrician have a clean go in the switchboard. And it also meant we could stop the diesel. So a group of us were down in the diesel room holding torches while others tried to find a slack fan belt. It was one of those fan belts made out of a whole lot of little leather links and rivets.
Yep. Yep.
So they were busily taking a link out of the belt so as to make it tighter, when all of a sudden the lights came on and the diesel cranked over. Yes, horrified they were, they're not happy. Somebody had tried the coat hanger trick again, upstairs. By the middle of the afternoon, the problems were resolved, got back, but it was a very interesting introduction to broadcasting for somebody who'd only been there a week.
So from broadcasting, you made a bit of a change, and you ended up in London.
After the training course, back on station, a lot of work on outside broadcasts.
Yeah.
We did 2 church services every Sunday,
Is that right? Yeah.
and over one year period I did just over 50% of them. Then it had been a long-term family plan that we would go overseas, and Mum and Dad would let the house. So at the end of '63, Peter and I got on a ship and went to the UK, and Mum, Dad and Christopher joined us in January. And before I went, one thing about broadcasting, it paid quite a lot of penal rates and overtime in addition to my salary.
Yeah.
So I wasn't feeling all that unfinancial. And so I'd placed an order for an 1100 through DMs.
Dominion Motors.
And, yeah, Dominion Motors.
Yeah.
And picked it up at Nuffield Exports in Holland Park about a month after I arrived. So that gave us useful transport all around Britain and Europe. Requirements because of overseas fans and import restrictions and all sorts of lunacy, meant that I had to have owned and used the car for 12 months and been away for 21 to be able to bring it back here. So that dictated how long I was away. The first year when I was based in London, I worked for a couple of car radio companies. We rushed around, yes, most of us rushed around London in minivans, putting car radios into cars at various dealerships. Cars in Britain at that time were not sold with radios installed. The only car that came with a radio built in from the factory was a Rolls-Royce. Anything else, the radio was an aftermarket accessory. So when Joe Customer called in and said, "Oh yes, I'd like a Hillman Minx with a radio," the salesman would show him various brochures and find out what sort of radio he'd like, and then he'd ring up J. Davy and say, "Look, this customer, he wants a Smith's Radio Mobile with fully retractable aerial, and the car will be here for its pre-delivery on next week. Send somebody down." And then one of us would be sold. Yeah. "Oh, go on down, he like motors at Turin." And fit.
Yeah.
There is a Smith's radio in the MGA behind me.
Yeah. And of course, Mercedes-Benz also had
which I put there. Peter and I went on an extended tour of Europe during Peter's school holidays. Peter teaches.
Right, yeah.
Which resulted in my resignation from J. Davy. And when I came back, I got a job partly on the basis of the job I'd had with them with Atkinson's battery service. And Atkinson's tended to deal much more upmarket vehicles than Davies did, but also much more locally. We really only worked around the West End, where where Davies had gone miles out of London in every direction. Ilford, Farnborough, Kent. Okay. Yes, miles.
Yeah.
We covered colossal mileages. A major customer with Atkinson's was Mercedes Great Britain, who were importing models of every variety. The Mercedes 6000 had just been released, and this was around Earl's Court time. So two of us were sent out. The edict had come down from the Earl's Court people: no car radios are to be in working order. Apparently the year before, every hoodlum in London had amused himself by turning on every car radio at the show on full volume, and the pandemonium had been beyond belief. So we were faced with installing a dummy radio, and it turned out to be a major exercise. You had to lower the air conditioner to get it out of the way while you fitted this damn thing up. Terrible. Well, that was all right. That car went off to the show and got shown, and everybody was more or less happy until it came back, when every piece of varnished woodwork in the car had been coined. Oh. They'd scored. Now, as it was all matched veneer, it meant a complete new set of woodwork had to come over to re-trim the car from the damage. And inter alia, we fitted a proper radio instead of the dummy. In the interim, one of the other 6000s had been sent down to Atkinson's to have a radio installed. And our senior installer, who didn't do mobile work, that was beneath him, was working on the car, everything in the if I said 6,000, 600. But it is a 6-litre car.
Yeah.
Is either air or hydraulic. Adjusting the seats, unlocking the boot, everything. So he was getting low on air, so he had the engine running on fast idle, and the car in park, and he was getting on with the work, sitting on with the driver's door open and sitting on the sill, when vibration from the engine flicked it into reverse, and the car backed up, bang, against the concrete wall, whacking him across the chest with the door, which didn't appeal. And when Mercedes heard about this, they were bloody cross too. And this argument was getting quite heated between Atkinson's and Mercedes, when out at their large depot at Brentford, another 600 did the same thing. The only snag was, instead of a nice solid concrete wall, they herringboned the cars in rows. So the one that went backwards promptly took out 2 others that were behind it.
So much for German efficiency.
Yes, German efficiency. A gearbox that can put itself from park into reverse because of a little bit of vibration, it doesn't seem like a good idea.
No.
And it was while all this saga was going on, next time I went out to Brentford on other business, there was a burnt ruin sitting in the corner. They had a rolling road in a little test enclosure in the corner of this big barn, and the rolling road had caught fire under a nice new Mercedes 300 SE that was on the rollers, and there was this burnt out ruin of the shed, the 300, the rolling road, all looking very charred. And it was about that stage that I resigned from this altogether and went off with friends and the 1100, which I had to export from Britain within a year, to warmer climes in Spain.
Okay, yeah.
By then the family had come home anyway. Well, I still had some of my 21 months to work out.
Yeah. The things you have to do to buy an 1100. The things you have to do to buy an 1100.
Yes. So that all worked all right. I did discover that it was actually possible to re-import the car to the UK as a tourist vehicle, though not on its original plates. And they issued different plates at the dockside. So, but it also had the advantage I didn't have to pay the road tax.
Okay.
I was exempt
Right.
tax, which was good. And the car was having a few mischiefs. And chap I'd been friends with, and one of the group who'd gone to Spain, was doing odd jobs for a couple of write-off kings in Southampton. So I went and joined him in Southampton, and they worked in this brick arch under a bridge that went over the railway.
Yeah.
And they also did odd jobs for the trade around Southampton, for which their motto was shitty but shiny. They'd thump the rust with a hammer so that it was below panel level, and then they would cover the hole with masking tape, and then they would cover the masking tape with pudding and sand it down and spray it and give it back to the dealership with the important warning, and unless you're sure of a sale, don't demonstrate it in wet weather, because the water would get in behind and lift the paint off the fibre. Well, yes, I could see this being a little difficult. They never paid for anything unless if they could nick it. Right. And a good deal of what they nicked came from Renault, Great Britain, where Dick had worked. Dick was a fund of all sorts of stories. He'd worked for Morris Radiators before the war, and then he'd worked on skinning Lancaster Bombay doors during the war, and he was really a very, very good panel beater. Not a bad spray painter, but a very good panel beater. So, on the rare occasions when we actually did it properly,
You did a good job, yeah.
Ultimately, the 21 months was up,
Yeah,
so I came home,
yeah. And you brought the 1100 with you?
and we brought the 1100 out.
Yeah. Where did the Y-type come into this picture then? We've got the Y-type saloon in here somewhere.
Now, we'd have to back up a long way,
Before you went away, wasn't it?
because a year or so after I joined broadcasting, I cadged a ride with one of my colleagues to go to the Grand Prix. So this is Ardmore 58.
Yeah.
And went up there in his Morris 10. And went again with him the next year and decided, and at this stage I had a Morris 12. 12.4, 1938, 39, something. Very thirsty vehicle, lucky to do 22 to the gallon downhill. And I decided I really wanted something else. A group I belonged to, one of the members had what is more accurately his wife, had a Y-type. And so I had ridden in one of these things, and I thought, one of those would be nice. And at that point, we just got back from the Grand Prix. The Y-type, a Y-type came up in the paper. So I went round and had a look, and it looked good. And somehow we seem to have got to 1961. Bought it. I was only the second owner. He'd had it imported to special order new.
Right, yeah.
In 1951.
Yeah.
Though I think it was more a 1950 spec car.
Took a while to get here.
Certainly a YA.
Yeah.
But a late YA because the battery had moved. The early YA had the battery offset to one side,
Okay.
so that you could take it out with the bonnet on.
Right, yes.
But the later, they moved it to the middle so that the car could be made ambidextrous and potentially sold to right-hand drive, left-hand drive markets.
Yeah.
I don't know that any were ever built as left-hand drivers, but there it was. The car now had all the various fitments necessary to allow the column to go down on the other side of the engine.
Yeah.
And that car served to do Gold Star trials. We did the Evening Post Gold Star trial at least twice with various co-drivers. Never came anywhere much. all sorts of various events, and were very much the reason for joining the club. Okay. So I joined the club in early '61. I've been here ever since.
The club only started
59, I think.
Yeah. So who were the people you remember from those very early days of the club?
Well,
Hans, what's his name?
Hans Holler,
yeah,
who was a Austrian, I think, German or Austrian, and I think he may have been here on secondment for something. Certainly he went back to Europe.
Yeah.
Of the one people know, Gary Wall, who's definitely a foundation member.
Yeah.
The Smith brothers, Ken and Roy.
Yeah.
Roy died quite young. And as far as I know, his widow, well, I know she'd be married, and she was living out at Tawa.
Rick O'Neill, or was he a bit later?
Rick O'Neill, I think, is later.
Okay.
But not by much.
No.
Certainly I came back up with them all when I got back from the UK. The installation work went on, and it was very much the Rotorua immediately followed by this excursion into television in Hamilton that meant that I was feeling seriously wealthy. At one stage, walking between, Dad worked for a while as office dog's body at the museum.
Yeah.
One of the perks this gave him was free parking. So if I was in Wellington, the two of us would car share to go to work. My base was in Marchbank Street, engineering section, and because we were 4:30 finishers and he was a 5 o'clock, I would walk round to the museum.
Past some car yards.
Past sundry car yards up Cambridge Terrace. And wandering up Cambridge Terrace, I passed a twin cam. And I wrote down the number plate. Well, I wasn't very wealthy at that stage. And then came Rotorua, and then came Hamilton. And then I thought, I wonder where that car's got to, if it ever got sold. So I put in a request to Motor Edge, which could be done at the cost of 1 6 at the time.
Yep.
And, oh yes, it was in the car yard in Christchurch. And not only that, it hadn't seen a private owner since it was in the one in Wellington.
Right.
The via one in Palmerston North had migrated to Christchurch. Well, one of the people who'd been seconded to my installation team in Rotorua was a Christchurch technician. So I got in touch with him and asked if he'd go around and have a look at this thing in the car yard, and most importantly, see if it still had a twin overhead cam engine. So he went round there and had a look and reported back, well, I don't really know anything about MGs, but yes, it appears to be to description. So I rang him up, made the date to go down. In fact, I think the Hamilton job was still proceeding. Went down, picked it up and brought it back to Wellington, and in fact took it up to Hamilton for some of the remainder of the job. But I still had the 1100 in parallel with it. And that all worked out all right.
I think you're one of the more caring owners. I remember you telling me about someone raced it at one stage and...
Oh, yeah, well, before I got it, it had had a bit of a checkered history. The car originally was in Australia. That was where it was exported to. It's Abingdon built export spec vehicle,
Yeah.
and had gone to Australia. I don't know whether it ever had a genuine Australian owner. If it did, I've never been able to trace them. There were stories that it had been road tested for one of the Aussie mags, but closer investigation showed that, in fact, whoever had possession of the vehicle at the time had allowed the mag to look at it, but not to drive it, and they borrowed somebody else's for the road test.
Okay.
The person who imported it to New Zealand was Frank Turpey. He apparently had quite a large mouth and was full of all the good stuff he was going to do with this car until he went out to Levin. And Sybil saw his racing debut, as did a cousin of mine. They agree, at least, that he did not reach the first bend off the grid before he blew it up. I don't know exactly what the damage was. But I don't think he ever competed in it again and traded it into Dominion Motors after it had been repaired. The next owner was, you might know, the service station at the end of, just at the top of the gorge, on the left as you're going into Wellington. What's his name? Been there for years.
No.
And I can't think of it. His brother was the next owner. And many years later, by the time the internet was a going concern and things, I managed to trace this gentleman and get in touch with him, and in fact I think spoke to him by phone. He only had the thing for 3 months. Got into a dice on the Napier Taupo Road with a Jag, in the course of which he blew it up and got towed into Napier, and the people there, when they dismantled it, shook their heads rather. Well, they gave him two choices. We can fix it properly at the cost of something large, or we can fix it rather more cheaply on a cobble it up basis. He settled for the cobble up. And with it at least going, sold it. And that was when it started its tiki tour of dealers. Well, of the things I know, because I have had most everything apart at one time or another in the last 50 years, at some point the centre main bearing has the shell's been spun.
Yeah.
And I think must have fractured the bearing cap, because the bearing cap for the centre main has been made by somebody who was quite a good machinist out of solid billet of steel.
Yeah.
But the other curiosity, one connecting rod was significantly shorter than the other three, and therefore correspondingly lighter, and the cut across the end was no longer across the diameter. I got onto the car club in UK, and they quoted me, well, said I could probably get a new set of connecting rods made for £800. And that didn't appeal. And then Gordon Vogter in Hastings said, have you tried Jim Alcorn in California? He has a lot of twin cam stuff. So I got on to him, and oh, yes, what weight would you like? Because the things at factory level were matched by weight.
Right, yeah.
I think there were 4 selective assembly weights. So I told him what weight, $80 US. Well, that, altogether more my price range than the Pommy version, and that's what's now in it.
Yeah, yeah. I think the first time I saw the car, you had a problem with one of the camshafts and were modifying a Jaguar one to fit or something.
Somewhere along the line, one of the cams anyway had been seriously badly ground, and doing a little research only through motor manuals, repair manuals, I discovered that the timing for some of the Jaguars is within 1 degree of the timing for the twin cam, in terms of open angle, not in terms of real position, and that the lift was identical at 3/8 of an inch. And undoubtedly, local reconditioner was happy to put his Jag profile on his cam grinding machine and grind them to the Jaguar profile. The big difference in terms of practicalities is that it means it now runs with, on that cam, Jaguar clearance, valve clearance, instead of MG, because the can't think of the term.
I know what you mean.
They're not the same height.
No.
So that resolved that problem. But exactly which of these issues relates to which of these events, I don't know. I got it all. Oh, there was a bit of issue with rust in sills and things of that ilk. So for a while, and a small matter of the fact that I'd got married and was building a house and things, meant the car got sidelined. And I did some work on the motor. And that was when the camshafts got ground.
Yep.
Got it all put back together and going quite nicely, and a friend of mine and I went out on a night trial in which we got abominably lost, and it was seriously late, and we coming home from where it had finished over at Partnui, over Haywards Hill, and had to booting it really hard coming over Haywards, when all of a sudden it went down onto 3 and wasn't going well, and we crawled over the top of Haywards and down. When we stopped at the lights at the bottom of Haywards, the traffic lights on the West Nut Road, Bernard said, "I can't see my knees." It was very smoky and very smelly.
Yes.
So we got it home, and it did have enough power to back into the garage,
Yeah.
which was uphill.
Yeah.
And so we opened the bonnet, and with the help of the crank handle, quite quickly identified which cylinder now had no compression. So we took the plug out and put a bit of wire down through the plug hole.
It kept going.
And it kept going and going and going. So we decided we knew exactly what the problem was, and I took Bernard home in the 1100. Useful to have two cars. Dismantled everything. Yeah, definitely. Very old piston immediately under the spark plug. So took the piston out and thought about it and couldn't. Oh, and the whole thing had already been booked, as it were, for the 81 pre-56 at Martin. How do we get this thing going again? Went round to see my favourite aluminium welder in Marion Street.
Yeah.
Marion Street.
Yeah, be right.
He'd done it once before for an outboard motor we had. He'd welded up a burnt piston. Could he weld up the hole? Oh, yeah. So he welded up the hole. The whole thing was certainly regarded as fairly suspect, but I thought, oh, well, keep it going for a bit while I formulate a better plan.
Yeah.
It got to Martin, and we'd done everything pretty much except the speed event on the last day, and for that they booked Manfield. So we went to Manfield and had a good blast at Manfield. And thought, well, if it falls out now, we've got the magnet to tow it home with. This is the old grey
Magnet.
Fred Flintstone magnet.
Yes. Yes.
And gave it heaps, to the point where it actually succeeded in posting fastest time of the day with an out of weight and still with the short camshaft, because short connecting rod, because I hadn't found that stage. All sorts of mysteries. Fastest time of the day. Next contender was Garth Bagnall's blown J2. So went home pretty darn satisfied about that. And it was still going. It was about then that I saw an ad in Safety Fast where their twin cam spares person had just succeeded in acquiring 4 sets of, I think, 20 oversize old new stock high compression pistons.
Yeah.
As my brother was currently in the UK on a bit of a jaunt, by dint of some very quick phone calls and all sorts of things, managed to put the one in touch with the other, and he brought home a set of pistons in his baggage. And I think it was about after they got here that, because I already knew that the car was on standard bores at that stage, albeit worn.
Yeah. So are they still in the car, those ones? No.
I think that was where I found out about the damaged connecting rod.
Okay. Yeah.
Fitted the replacement and generally got things tidied up properly.
Yeah, because it's got low compression ones in it
So
now.
it's now got low compressions in,
Yeah.
partly because for a while one couldn't, premium wasn't available, and the lead-free muck wasn't all that good at 9.9 to 1.
No.
And anyway, compressions were getting down and things weren't very happy. I think about the last trip it did with the high comp pistons was pre-56 at Queenstown,
Okay. Yeah.
when the herds came out
Yeah.
from the States.
Yeah.
Jan Hurd is now the registrar for TSO, the Sacred Octagon.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. It's certainly you and the car have been to a lot of the.
we've been
lot of
to a
the
good many
pre-56s.
pre-56s.
Yeah.
I think in terms of Easter, 81 may have been the first I tried to get to, but the car missed and fluffed about a bit going up Haywards. And having had this piston holding issue and the cobbled up piston in it,
Yeah.
I gave that one away and didn't actually get there.
And you had nothing to do with the early Easter meetings at Taupo, which the club got banned from several hotels for being
No. The first
over-enthusiastic.
I didn't get to any until the 80s.
Yeah. So if it, what was in New Plymouth or something, probably.
Yeah, the early ones were at a motel up Carrington Road.
Yeah, where they
New
had a few
Plymouth.
drinking races by the swimming pool,
Yes.
but were generally well behaved.
They weren't bad. And my daughters were most indignant that the boat racing had stopped by the time they started coming. They were quite upset about that.
Well, I think we all got a bit sick of the boat racing, especially when we had to all drag Jamie Williams back to the motel after
Yeah.
a hugely excessive amount of bourbon.
The first one I remember, so it must have been 2 years later, because normally the organisation alternated between Auckland and Wellington. And by this time I was, I think, secretary in Wellington,
That'd be right, yeah.
but I certainly had some level of hand in the organisation, and this was at New Plymouth, and you and Dave Gilliver, certainly you had your A, Dave Gilliver had the V8,
Yeah.
and I remember a very fast drive back through Taranaki.
Probably in a magnet when I first turned up with Mike Hellberg and Bill Goodall and what have you, doing a lot of trials, night trials. They did a lot of that
Yeah.
sort of thing. Would that be the first events, or
Back
we're talking what, late 70s now, I suppose?
in the mid to late 70s, a chap, Lewis, and because his name was Lewis, he was obviously always known as Jerry,
Right.
was running an advanced driving course
Which I attended.
at Newlands College.
Yep.
And Kate and I attended that,
Yep.
and that was certainly in the context of the 1800.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the Wolsey.
Yep.
And Jerry and I did quite a number of night trials
Yep.
at that time,
Yep.
around that time.
I think his favourite expression was, "Oh God, what's he doing now?"
Oh, could be, could be.
Well, it was when I was driving anyway.
Right.
So.
Anyway, no, we didn't have any success,
No.
but we certainly did a few.
No.
And it was about then that a gentleman in Eastbourne was getting rid of the remains of one going and the remains of 3 other magnets. Well, I've always been a bit attached to the Magnet as a car, though I'd never owned one. So we bought Mr. Gibbs' graveyard, and the Magnet turned out to be the car that Lowell Spiller had owned at the time that the Wellington Centre was formed.
Right, yeah.
He's on the first minutes, the minutes of the first meeting out at Solihude's Holiday Park, Paraparam. And yes, I knew Lowell, but not well.
Right, yeah.
He was president or chairman, or whatever we called him in those days.
Right, yeah.
When I joined
Yeah.
back in '61. So it was quite interesting to have his car, but his car by then was
Yeah.
very rotten.
Yeah.
And we did some improvements to it, but not much.
No.
And the biggest improvement we made to it was to get a 3-bearing MGB motor and put that in place of the 1500 that was in it.
Right, yeah.
In that condition, it went to Martin,
Yep.
and that was the year that we went to walk the Milford track.
Oh, okay.
So Mark
Yeah.
came with us. We left the girls with their grandparents and went down, and driving down the South Island in this very decrepit looking motor car, we were waylaid by a traffic officer in Ashburton, and he asked if we had a warrant of fitness. So I got the warrant of fitness out of the glove pocket. You know, this is supposed to be stuck to the windscreen. Yes, it's just that the glue is so incredibly bad it blew off as we were driving to the boat to come across to the South Island. You could see disbelief starting to appear all over the place. My wife's just gone into the dairy to try and get the roll of sellotape so we can stick it back on. The look of disbelief was even greater. At which point, Kate came back with the roll of sellotape.
Saved.
Yeah, I pity the next poor motorist he stopped, because I'm sure he wasn't at all happy for the rest of the afternoon.
No.
However, we got down there and we did walk the Milford track, and
Yep.
everything was good, and the Magnet got us home.
I do remember we went to one Easter, and I was club captain or something, and I forgot to delete the ad for the car club that we had in the paper every Saturday night. So Kate spent the weekend taking MG Car Club calls, and she told me in no uncertain terms that she was displeased with us when we came home. I still remember my telling off to this day. So.
Yes.
And then you ended up with the Magnet from Wally Baker, wasn't it? The maroon one you've still
Yes.
got? Yeah, that was a much better car.
Oh, yes.
And you put the 3-bearing motor in that, I take it.
Well, yeah, we heard this very sad story that Wally had been found dead in his driveway beside his car. Now, I don't know which car. He had the maroon car registered in the name of his son,
Okay.
but his son was pre-driving age.
Right, okay, yeah.
I think he was 8 or so at
Okay. When he,
Martin,
right, yeah.
because he was three of us camped
Yep.
on the grass at Arahina,
Yep.
and he was one. The other one, his name I can't think of on the spur of the moment, from Ashburton.
Yep.
Um,
Well, you've had that Magnet quite a long time now. That's been a good car.
so
You've done a lot of work on it.
we got to know him reasonably well,
Yeah, yeah.
and he'd certainly brought it to Hastings.
Yeah. Where you did quite well in that sprint, as I recall. But
The
yeah.
Hastings one, we had the 1800 engine in the grey car,
Yep.
which was fairly extensively lightened, courtesy of Mr. Rust.
Rust. Yes.
And while we were stooging around Hawke's Bay, we were caught up with by Ken Smith,
Yep.
who sort of tagged along for the rest of the event, and I was running the MGA under difficulty somewhat. It wasn't running well in the quarter mile sprints, and we were on the proper drag strip,
Yeah.
you know, Christmas tree and everything,
Yep.
and it really wasn't performing. So I was rushing around getting plugs and trying to figure out why I had a persistent miss. And Kate competed the Magnet, with Ken giving her advice on how to get the best possible performance out of this thing down the standing quarter, to such good purpose that she posted 7th fastest time overall, which did surprise somewhat. She'd beaten quite a lot of ostensibly faster cars. We finally got one decent run out of the twin cam,
Yep.
when I discovered that the cause of all my problems was one of the suppressor plug caps
Okay. Yeah.
not making proper contact with things.
Yep.
So I had the HT wire tied directly around the top of the spark plug, and it ran properly for a change. And so it did set fastest time of the day on that occasion. So that was all good.
Well, it's come right, the twin cam, and it's been going quite well for a while. And I know this from some of the V8 owners who talked to me the other day about making you an honorary V8 owner.
Wrong car.
But you followed one of them home on a long trip, and he said that twin cam was behind me all the way, and I wasn't mucking around, so it must be going pretty good now.
The car they gave me a little certificate for
Yes.
is the Magnet.
Oh, really? It was the Magnet, was
On one occasion, going to Easter,
it? Yeah.
Charles Clark
Yeah.
and Bob Helena tried to organise a wee convoy using some Targa stages and things,
Yeah.
because Charles was rather keen on doing Targas
Yes.
between Wellington and New Plymouth.
Yeah.
So I said, oh yeah, I'd come along. So Kate and I went up, and I think Jane joined us later with the twin cam, but we were certainly in the Magnet, and things didn't entirely go according to plan, because on some backcountry road to the east of Hunterville, one of the float chambers fell off the carburetor. So a good deal of cobble up was then done, so that the car then only ran on one carburetor into Hunterville. And I went into the large, is it still a BP? I think it is, at the northern end of town.
Yeah.
And to see, because the bolt was missing, of course.
Yeah.
Oh,
Bit hard
I
to
think
find.
I know somebody. And he very kindly put me in his ute, and we drove a mile or so out of town to the north to this chap's farm, a couple of big barns, and he had more SU carburetors than you've ever seen in your life in there, along with other motoring paraphernalia, mostly of a mechanical nature. And I managed to get a banjo bolt, not exactly the right one, but one that would serve, and managed to bolt the carburetor back together and wasted a good deal of the day, while the other two went and, the other two groups, the Clarks and the Helenas, had gone off along the way to have some lunch. Kate, I didn't. Well, Kate may have got some lunch, I didn't, before we got it put back together. And then the Charles' plotted route brought us up the west side of the mountain, those back roads up by the Rhododendron Trust and things.
Yep, lovely.
And we came up there stoking along quite briskly. And it was after that that the two of them got together and made up this little certificate, making the Magnet an honorary V8.
Okay, yeah.
Because, yeah, we certainly were moving it along there. I wasn't really altogether happy. I felt that some of those corners, it'd be fine for a closed Targa stage.
Right.
But really, but with Charles in front of me to be the centrepiece of any accident.
Yeah. Clearing the road for you.
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
So, yeah, came hammering up there, and Bob following along the back of the line.
Yeah.
That was interesting too.
Yeah.
And I can't quite think which year that would have been.
It's only about 5 years ago or something. It wasn't that long ago, was it? A bit more?
Yeah, I think probably.
Bit more. Yeah.
Certainly I succeeded in impressing some Auckland members in their bees at the midwinter run.
Yeah. So it's been pretty good. Today you've got the twin cam, the Magnet, and you've got an MG3, which is your day-to-day shopping basket.
No,
No?
it isn't anything at the moment.
Oh, isn't
A
it?
bloody disaster.
What's
I didn't bring the photographs.
Is it gone wrong again? Had a problem with a little computer and then came right, didn't it?
The little computer they fixed,
Yeah.
not cheaply. The car got passed to the warrant of fitness time past the end of its 3-year warranty. So in other words, it was 4 years old.
Okay, yeah.
So I thought, oh well, I'll bring it round to Barry. And it came around here, and he immediately condemned it
Oh.
for corroded brake lines,
Oh, my giddy aunt.
not to mention extensive other corrosion.
One thing, MG have certainly given us a lot of entertainment over the years. Thank you very much.